Hi, let's talk about an important concept of lifting the state up in React.js. Imagine you have an application where you have a couple of components, and at the root level you have an app component, and imagine all these E, C, D, all different components available in the hierarchy. You can take in relation with Amazon application with login component, dashboard component, order component, wishlist component, spread across multiple hierarchical layers. Let's take a scenario where we have a component A. Inside the component, you are managing a state called as name. Imagine that state is required in component B. In React.js, typically what we do, we will lift the state up. In that case, what we are going to do, we are going to manage the state name at C component instead of A component. In similar fashion, if you want to manage the state at D, we'll be lifting the state one more step at E. This goes like that. Again, if you want it required it in the F, then we'll be again managing the state at app component layer. With that, you can pass if it requires at F, if required at G, you should be able to easily traverse and pass through the concept called as property drilling, which we are going to talk about in our upcoming session. So here if you observe, if the name state is required to be maintained at higher level than the one which is actually updating the name component, you need to typically go and lift the state up. Let's demonstrate this with an example. Let's define a user form with name and email. So here we have a simple form component with name and email fields, and for entering the both name and email, we create a separate component called as text input. Now text input has its own state for managing the value of the control and setting the value of the control. And inside our form component, we have two text put in controls, one for the name and one for email. Okay. Now if you want to submit this form with the name and email, the data that has been maintained by text input control, we need to shift or we need to lift the state up by moving it to the form component. Let's discuss on that scenario. I'm going to talk about how the text input control is available. So this is the text input component. We are passing the label from the parent component. Now if you observe, this has its own state called as value and a function to update its value. It uses input type text box. Value is maintained by the state, and whenever you try to change the value of this control on change event, we are using set value, we are going and updating the new value to the control. So this is how a text input control is maintained. Now I will demonstrate how this is used inside the user form component. Now if you see in user form component, we have the text input with one for capturing the name, another for capturing for the email. At the same time we have a button submit. Now on the submit button click, imagine you want to submit the form with the name and email fields captured. Now in this scenario, as text input manages its own state for the value, and as we need it in the user form, we need to lift the state, means the state maintenance instead of happening at the text input control or component, we need to maintain that at the user form. Okay. Now first let's demonstrate this example without lifting the state up, and I will try to show you how it is tough. Then we will try to solve this problem with lifting the state up. I'm back at my Visual Studio Code. Let's create a new folder called as lifting the state without lifting the state. So I create text input.js. Let's go and create a new component called as text input.js, and let's import the use state hook, and let's create the component called as function text input. And what we do, yes, we are going to have a text input control with value and set value maintained on its own, and we are going to get the label as an input from parent component. Okay, now we are going to export this component, and inside in our app.js to use this component. Okay, we need it in the user form component, so let's go and try to create another form called as user form component. So what exactly we need to do here? Create user form component, define the text input component for capturing email and name. Okay, this is what we want to do. So first we need to go and import the user text input component here. So let's go and try to import text input component here and define a component for the user form. Yes, and what exactly we want to do, we want to have the component text input component used for the name and email fields, and we can go and export this form. Now this form can be used directly in the, so let's go and try to import it here first. Okay, then let's go and try to use it here. Yes, perfectly fine. Now you can define a submit button to submit the form. Button to submit the form. So what exactly we do, we'll have a button of type submit here. Okay, now the challenge here is, as the state is maintained inside the text input control, you will not be able to access the value of the control that is internally maintained by this component. So what we need to do, we need to somehow lift this state up. Means instead of managing the state at, okay, we can have this label here also. Okay, I can have one, say I think previously I didn't have the label field. Yeah, we can go and have the label here. Okay, fine. Yeah, as we cannot have two controls at the top layer, we are going to use the empty fragment. Okay, so we are going to have we are going to have the we have to lift the state up, so that is very important. So let's refactor our example by lifting the state up, so that it will be easy for us to submit the user form with the name and value fields captured. So let me go and create another folder called with lift state app. So here I'm going to create the same text input control, but I'll try to name it as ls to indicate that it is by lifting the state up. So what we are going to do now, define text input ls component. We need to ideally which takes label comma value and on change as prop. So what we do first, let's go and try to, as it component is not going to manage its own state, we don't need the use state hook here. So what exactly we need it, let's go and try to define function text input control. Here we are accepting the label value and on value change here, and within this return tag we are going to have the label field, and at the same time we have input type text. Now if you see value, we are associating with the value field that has come from the parent component, and on value change also, like whenever there is a change in the value, we are internally calling the on value change function which has been taken from the parent component. Okay, so here I'm going to demonstrate another key feature called as how to pass the how to invoke the parent component function from the child component. This is also part of the component communication. Okay, so now we are taking label, value and on value change as inputs from the parent component, and we are associating the value to the value field, and we are whenever on change on change event happens, we are internally triggering the on value change function taken as a prop, and we are passing the submitted value over there. Let's demonstrate on how to use this inside the user form component. So first we need to export this. Export default text input ls, and we are going to create another component called as user form ls.js, and here what we need to do, import the text input ls. So that's the first thing we are going to do. Define the state for name and email, and again what to do, create a functions to handle the name and email change and handle the submit function, and we'll need to have even handle the submit function also. That's what we want to do. So first let's go and import the text input component. So we are going to use the import the use state, because we are trying to maintain the state for the name and email. So we need to go and import the text input from ls. Yes, we are going to do it. So now we are going to create a new component called as user form ls. So inside this we need to first maintain the name and email field. So first what we are going to do is, we are having the name field set name with use state being empty at the initial stages, and email and set email being empty at the initial stages over there. So let's go and define this component first. Let's go and try to define constant name and set name for the email field, and then again we'll have the email and set email for managing the state. Okay, then after that let's go and try to define a function for handling the name change, and again we have to define a function for handling the email. I'll tell you what exactly the name and email fields that are happening over there, and we need to have a function for handling the submit button. So we are going to define, once the name changes we want to update our state, once the email changes we want to update our state, once we submit we want to capture the name and email. So now let's define our render method here. So here what I'm trying to do, in our return statement, if you observe, we are using text input component with the label, name and value. So what exactly we are trying to pass here? Here the name state we are passing as a value, like to the value we are associating the name, and email we are associating with the email field here. Now when the value changes, like whenever this control value changes, we are trying to associate with the handle name change. Okay, when email changes we are associating the email change field over here. So with this, what exactly we are going to do, on value change is not a standard event. If you see here, on value change is a custom event or a prop, I can say. Okay, we are trying to pass on value change as a property to text input ls control, and whatever the function you have given is passed as a property to the child component. What is the text input component here? So if you go and try to look at our text input, okay, let's go and see this. Let me clear. So here let's have the text input ls. So what I mean here, whatever the value, so now if you see, the text input control has label, value, on value change. Three properties are there. So label is taken as a prop here, value is also taken as a prop here to the text input control, and value change also as a taken as a prop here. So whereas label and name are normal fields, a text fields, whereas on value change is nothing but a function. And we are using the same thing to display the name, and we are using again to the text input type text box. So if you see here, we are using a text input. When you say text input, it expects text input nothing but a component, and to that component it expects three different properties. Whereas inside the text input, we are actually using the standard HTML5 input control. So to that of type text, we are associating the value field. And again, on change is a standard HTML JavaScript event. Whereas if you see this on value change is a custom event or a prop. Okay, prop to the text input control. So what we are doing is whenever the standard text bot value changes, it is internally calling the on value change. What is an on value change? Is a function passed from the parent component. So in this case, the value change points to handle name change, which internally goes and calls the name change here. Same thing happened for the email field also. So with this, as the state is getting maintained at the user form ls component with name and email, on submit we should be able to handle the access the name and email. So we can send the data to the server with the name and email saying that yes, this is the user who has been created or who has been logged in over here. So now let's try to do a live demonstration of this. Let's go and try to export this form, export default user less, and I'm trying to close these things so that we'll have a single screen. Yeah. Now go to our app.js and we'll go and import this instead of user form. I want to go and import the user form ls. Ls stands for the lifting the state app. User form ls done. Now let's go and try to import this in user form ls here. Okay, perfect. Let's start running our application. Now if you observe, we have the name and email fields that are available in the UI. Let's go and debug this application now. Go to sources, control B, user form ls. Yes, and yeah, we are going to keep the breakpoint here. At the same time, I'm interested in the text input component also. So whenever, yeah, so in case if you want to debug here, if you see on value change, if you define like this, you will not be able to debug, because if it is a arrow functions defined here, you will not be able to debug. For any reason, if you want to debug, we need to go and change that as a named function there. Okay, let me quickly define to change that as a named function here. So what we do is we'll try to define an event called as function dot handle change, right? So what we do here, instead of from there, let's go and call this handle change here, so it will be easy for us to debug. And let's try to reload our application and go and inspect, go to sources. Yeah, now control P, go to our user form ls also. Yes, perfectly fine. Now try to right, so when you're trying to define the controls, let's see, like I just want to demonstrate that concept. Okay, when you try to go and enter some data here, like yeah, so now soon after the value change, so as I entered k symbol here, it has already invoked this value with as k. And at time being, yeah, now what you do is whenever this triggered, so it is internally going and triggering the k. Like now if you see here, I'll try to show the flow again. So now I'll try to enter u now. So when I enter u, if you observe the method, now we are trying to see here, this is nothing but whenever you try to change the data in this text box, it is triggering the handle change in the text component, text input ls. Okay, inside the text input ls, what are you calling? You are invoking the function again as on value change. From where you are getting the on value change? On value change function is coming as an input to this text input component. What is this on value change? Is nothing but a function. Okay, so now we got this handle change. Now this is, now if you see here, as this whatever the handle change method, if you see here, okay, let me have this here, on value change we are passing the handle name change as the input. So this is passed like to the text input control, the property on value change, we are passing the handle name change. That's the reason from text input ls you are able to term the text input ls. Whenever you are passing the on value change as an input, from here on handle change you are calling the on value change function again. This is internally going and invoking the handle name change whatever has been associated for those things, and with that you are able to update the state. So now inside the on value handle name change, what you are doing, you are going and updating the state of the user form ls component. With this, whenever you try to submit, you have the name field and you have the email field, so you can easily submit. So what we are trying to do here, instead of managing the state at the text input ls, we are lifted the state to the user form ls, because user form ls is the one where you want to submit form data to the server. Here two key concepts. See, we talked about how to pass function as a prop to the child component. Here handle name change is nothing but a function, and we pass that as a prop to the we pass that as a prop to the text input component, and again from the child component we are able to invoke this value change. Okay, so here another key takeaway which I want you guys to take it over here was, so far in the parent component communication, so we have, let's take this, so from parent to child component, and this is from child to parent component. Okay, so let us assume that this is our parent component and this is our child component. So we have already seen from a parent component to the child component, we can pass props as the like name, email, all those things we have seen here. See, apart from that, we are able to pass the function also. When you pass the function, so from child component to the parent component, how we are going to get the communication? Whatever the function that is passed as a parameter to the child function, you can go and invoke that. So when you invoke your internal, if you want to pass any data from the child component, you should be able to pass it to the parent component also. So if the child component has to communicate with the parent component, means if you want to pass any data, that happens via functions. In the sense, whatever the data, first step is from the parent component you pass the function as the parameter. In this case, in the parent component, what we need to do, if you can pass function as a prop to the child component. From the child component you can invoke that function. Like if you want to pass any data, like for example you want to pass any data, you can pass data so that it will be available. So in this case, what we are passing, we are passing the name that has been entered by the user and the email that has been entered by the user. So this is another key concept on how the components communicate between each other, from the parent to child component and child to the parent component. Okay, let's go back to our debugging example here. So in this case, yes, so what exactly the key takeaway from here? Instead of managing the state at text input control, we are managing the state at the user form ls. So this is done for the name change. Now you go and try to enter any data for the email. So again, yeah, it is now it is at the text input control with value as k. Now it is internally calling the on value change, that is nothing but one value change. What exactly is there? This is the handle email change. So that's the reason when you go and try to debug this, now it is going to call the handle email change that is available in the parent component. It is internally going and updating the state. What exactly it is doing here? It is internally updating the state of the email. So this is very important concept, okay? The lifting the state up. Let's do a quick recap of what exactly we have discussed. We have talked about having a text input component have managing its own state and using the text input component inside the user form component. Now if the user form component has to submit the data, for example, let's say it have on click, if it has to submit the data, defining the submit method here. So you will not be able to access the name and email fields here. The reason, the data has been maintained by the text input control. So what we have taken, we have refactored our example that the text input component is not going to manage the state, internally takes the label value and on value change as inputs, and whenever there is a change, it is internally going to call the parent component on value change, and we are passing for individual, for name on value change which function I want to execute, for the email on value change which function I want to execute. And whenever that change happens, your child component is going to invoke this, and it is internally going and updating the state. So now here you are managing the state at the user form component so that you are able to easily submit the data. So this is what we have discussed. Like for example, the name state which is required created and maintained at A, if you want at D, we have lifted the state up. In our example also, text input which is managing the state as we want in the user form, we have lifted the state up there.